In World War II, fire was logistics. It cooked rations, sterilized tools, dried uniforms, and kept men functional in cold, wet environments. Yet standard fuel tablets were not always available, and when they were, they burned fast, smelled strongly, and required careful storage. Soldiers, field medics, and resistance fighters therefore relied on something far simpler and more reliable wax-impregnated paper. It was cheap, compact, waterproof, and far more versatile than issued fuel tabs. This was not a trick of desperation. It was a deliberately adopted field solution that spread quietly because it worked every time. So, why did World War II forces need something better than fuel tablets? Well, fuel tabs were effective, sure, but they had their limitations. They tended to crack, they absorbed moisture from the air, and, to make matters worse, they were often rationed. This meant soldiers couldn't always count on having enough of them when they needed them most. In prolonged operations, soldiers learned pretty quickly that relying solely on issued consumables was, frankly, a bit risky. They had to adapt, improvise, and find other ways to meet their needs in the field. Wax paper, by contrast, was already present in the supply chains. It was used to wrap food, protect sensitive equipment, and line containers. This made it a practical and honestly quite an ingenious solution for soldiers on the move. With minimal preparation, it became a controlled burning fuel source that could be adapted to almost any fire-starting scenario. The real advantage was predictability. Wax paper did not flare uncontrollably, and it did not extinguish easily in wind or damp conditions. What the wax paper hack actually was. The method involved saturating ordinary paper with paraffin wax, beeswax, or a blend of both. The paper acted as a wick, while the wax provided slow-burning fuel. When ignited, it burned longer and hotter than untreated paper, and far more steadily than many early fuel tabs. In practice, soldiers often folded or twisted the waxed paper to regulate airflow. A tightly packed roll burned slowly. A loosely crumpled sheet produced a faster flame. This adjustability made it superior to single-purpose tablets. Now, let's talk about why waxed paper burns stronger than you might expect. You see, wax alone, well, it just melts and pools, not really giving you much of a flame. Paper by itself, on the other hand, burns quickly and, honestly, a bit inconsistently. But when you put the two together, they actually form a controlled combustion system. It's a clever bit of fieldcraft, really. As the paper fibres char, the melted wax feeds the flame upward, creating what's known as a vertical burn. This method resists wind and quite helpfully sheds moisture rather than absorbing it. It's a simple trick, but remarkably effective in the field. Because wax is hydrophobic, rain and damp ground had little effect on the starter. In fact, a waxed paper starter could be placed directly on wet soil or even snow, and it would still burn long enough to ignite larger fuel. It's these small details that made all the difference out there. Now, this method, it was actually used during the war in several places. Waxed fire starters, you see, appeared across multiple theatres. Allied troops in Europe relied on them, especially during those harsh winter campaigns when wood was wet and, well, pretty scarce. In the Pacific, where the humidity would just ruin matches and those fuel tabs would degrade rather quickly, wax paper really proved invaluable. Resistance groups, interestingly enough, favoured this method because, well, it could be disguised as ordinary packaging material. Field manuals rarely mentioned it explicitly, which, made it even more valuable. It required no authorization and no explanation if discovered. How soldiers prepared wax paper in the field. Preparation was simple and fast, really. Wax was shaved or melted from candles, ration tins, or sealing wax. Paper was dipped, brushed, or rubbed until saturated, then cooled flat or folded. Some soldiers layered multiple sheets to increase burn time. Others embedded string, cloth or sawdust to extend ignition duration. Once prepared, the paper was rolled tightly and stored in pockets or tins. Now, here's the thing. This hack actually outperformed the issued fire starters. Fuel tabs, well, they burned hot, but only for a short while. Wax paper, on the other hand, burned at a moderate heat, but lasted quite a bit longer. That difference really mattered, especially when you were trying to ignite damp wood or heat up one of those small cooking stoves out in the field. Wax paper wasn't just for starting fires either. It also doubled as a moisture barrier, packaging material, and even an emergency sealant. So it was, truly multifunctional rather than just a single-use item. Another advantage, and this is important, was control. A soldier could simply tear off exactly what was needed, which meant conserving material for later. Fuel tabs, well, they offered no such flexibility at all. Now, you might be wondering how modern users can actually apply this knowledge correctly. Well, the same principles really do apply today. Wax paper fire starters are just as effective for camping, emergency kits, and even, off-grid living. Interestingly, the process remains unchanged. You simply melt wax safely, impregnate the paper fully, allow it to cool, and then, of course, store it dry. When needed, just expose an edge, light it, and, well, build your fuel gradually. The key here is restraint. Too much wax leads to smoke and dripping, but, balanced saturation gives you a clean, steady flame. Why this knowledge nearly vanished after the war is, well, a tale of changing times. You see, post-war consumer culture really favoured convenience above all else. Disposable lighters and factory-made fire starters quickly replaced those old, low-tech solutions. Wax paper, for instance, returned to our kitchens, and honestly, its fuel potential was pretty much forgotten. Yet, time and again, modern survival scenarios prove that simple, durable systems will outperform the more complex ones when conditions start to deteriorate. Why this World War II hack still matters. Waxed paper fire starters represent a mindset shaped by scarcity and realism. They show how wartime ingenuity turned everyday materials into reliable tools. No branding, No patents, no manuals, just understanding combustion and working with it. For history enthusiasts and survivalists alike, this hack is a reminder that effectiveness does not require sophistication. It requires understanding. If this deep dive into wartime fieldcraft added real value to your knowledge, support Backyard Wisdom by subscribing, sharing this guide, and helping preserve practical history that still works when modern systems fail.